freedom and their health intact. Because every week in Boston, there's another thing of someone who, like a mother and their child were killed by her boyfriend who just came and shot them. Like, this is an issue that goes through all parts of our life, and I think it's scary because we know that even if we give advice...
I'm sorry, that's like, unless you ask me, give me something, you're not getting nothing.
And that's Journey's boundary, right? And we've been talking a lot about this, right? And so
feel that you are on the subordinate end and like you're having to be submissive to someone else, or do you feel like you have a little say, but like these are your parents, so they're annoying? You know, there's a difference. There is a big difference, I think, in how... Hi, everyone. Welcome to Season 4 of the Real Love, Real Talk podcast. We're glad to have you back. On this season, you can expect conversations led by our young people around various topics within the conversation of teen dating violence awareness and healthy relationship promotion. Some audiences may find this subject matter triggering. We encourage you to reach out to a trusted adult, family member, or friend if this is the case. You can always find additional resources in our show notes or on our website, startstrongboston.org. Hi everyone, my name is Hannah. I am 18 years old and use she, her pronouns. I am in the 12th grade, and I will pass it on to Journey to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Journey. I'm 15 years old and use she, her pronouns. I'm in the 10th grade. I'm going to pass it off to Janae to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Janae. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program manager for Start Strong. And I am going to pass it to Journey to introduce our theme today.
Today we're going to be talking about unhealthy versus abusive relationships, where we will discuss the similarities and differences between the two types.
So the first topic we will be discussing under abusive and unhealthy relationships is the difference between the two and understanding that importance. And I personally believe this is an important conversation because many people either think too few things in our world is abuse, when abuse is a very common phenomenon, or people think that too many things are an unhealthy relationship when they are in fact abusive. So I feel like people either over-assign the word abuse to situations or they under-assign it, which is, it's a very serious matter, which is why we can't be doing that. So our first question is, what might happen if someone misunderstands or mixes up unhealthy versus abusive relationships, or like the idea of that? Well, to start with, I think if you misuse the idea of or misunderstand abusive versus unhealthy, it can lead to problems when you're dealing with conflict in a relationship that maybe isn't abusive but just has some issues, and instead you might bring that up to the person, and it could cause them to feel very attacked and defensive, which is not a good way to work on conflict or solve a relationship. So it can hinder those like relationships that are not abusive when people act like they are.
I don't know. I just feel like if you confuse the two, you just go about handling them in the wrong way. Because if you think they're like a little bit too similar than they really are, there's going to be different ways, like you said, about the conflict and stuff. So, like, one way of trying to, like, stop an unhealthy relationship, it won't be the same, and it's not going to be as effective in trying to, like, end an abusive one.
Yeah. While you're thinking,
Go.
I also think on that note that, like, dealing with an unhealthy relationship, so like the difference, at least in my brain, between unhealthy and abusive relationship is more of a deliberate pattern in an abusive relationship, whereas an unhealthy relationship, something might have happened like a few times, and they haven't quite figured that problem out yet, but it hasn't been long enough to become like a pattern. And I think like if you're not prescribing the word abuse to a situation when it is abusive, that allows the person who has control of the power dynamic in the relationship to further like manipulate their victim and get away with it because they're not being called what they are.
And you kind of already hinted at the differences between the two in defining that, but could you guys give a specific and explicit definition of what an unhealthy relationship is and what an abusive relationship is?
I feel like an unhealthy relationship is just like if somebody is doing something that can harm it. But abusive is like you keep doing it. Oh, like also unhealthy probably like one time or a couple of times, but the person doesn't realize. But abusive is like the person realizes that what they're doing is harmful, but they're still doing it anyways.
I agree with that. I think that while like abuse, it is a lot more of a pattern, and I feel like unhealthy in general might just be like disagreements or like things two people in a relationship like they don't do something the same way, so because they don't do it the same way, it causes a lot of like friction and they can't really get through like normal arguments without having that kind of like ability to understand each other. Like I feel like a lack of communication can be unhealthy in kind of like subtler things, whereas like abuse is purposefully harming a person, whether that's mentally, physically, sexually, financially, as we've talked about, by like taking someone's money or holding on to their money in a relationship, but just all those things of like trying to control someone, I think is abuse. Whereas unhealthy is like just a misunderstanding more so.
Like, I think the key things that I'm hearing y'all say is like pattern and continuous, and I feel like the one thing that I could maybe add is like those actions being intentional. You know, like the person who is being abusive is doing that with the intent to harm, right? Is doing that with the intent to degrade or, you know, like things along those lines.
I agree with that, and I think that's such an important distinction. What do you think, Journey?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. For my next question, what does it look like to try and repair an unhealthy, not abusive relationship?
Simply just communication. Because like when it's abusive, it's a lot harder to try, like, stop that. But unhealthy before it gets abusive, maybe a few conversations, I think.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think with unhealthy, just both of you, like, because the reason you're having that conflict in the first place is because you both don't see eye to eye on something. So I think just kind of breaking it down and trying to understand where you both, like, your ideas go against each other. And it might be, like, you might have to employ methods. Like, we can't yell or, like, we can't, like, raise our voice, which is, like, because an unhealthy relationship, like, people are just different. That can be, like, you might have to use methods to get that communication open, but it is still possible, like, highly so, if people are able to listen and, like, they want to change, too.
So communication is what I'm hearing, having a conversation. I liked what you said of, like, establishing group, like, I think of, like, the group agreements, right, that we have with programming, yeah. But, like, these are the rules, right, for this space. And I like in those things, we kind of talked about it in like the conflict resolution episode, but what does it look like for both people to actually come together and be like, okay, like this is the problem, this is what we're coming together to resolve.
Yeah.
So I like that. I like that a lot. Anything we want to add? I feel like I see you thinking.
Because I feel like Hannah made a good point when she said they have to like understand where each other are coming from. Because yeah, you could have that conversation, but unless the other person is understanding their wrongs, then there's no point in having the conversation because nothing will change.
Do y'all know the word for putting yourself in somebody else's shoes?
Gaining perspective.
What else? What is something that you can practice where you're...
Empathy.
Yes. Empathy. And that's important. Like, literally, like, you have to practice empathy to understand, like, okay, this is my perspective, but this is their perspective, right? Like, this is how they could have seen, you know, me checking in on them, you know, like every hour. Some people are like, dang, like I just really care about you, right? But like some people like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I don't need that, right? Like it's borderline controlling. And it like that person's intentions, right? Like wasn't to be controlling, right? Might have been just to check in, they were bored. But like to understand the different individuals in that scenario's perspective, like one person kind of felt like it was overbearing. The other person was coming from a place of care, but like the impact was not, you know, like what they thought it was. So yes, thank you.
I feel like that's a really good point, just because like if you break it down, the things we do here, like group agreements, and that's kind of just the basis to what we learn on how to like have conflict with one another in a healthy way, or to like communicate, because all of us come here with like very different viewpoints and very different experiences. But like the group agreements, for example, like don't say ick to someone, or like don't yuck someone else's yum, or like don't talk about something outside of the group. Like things like that are just commonsensically smart to use on an everyday, like with your friends, because if you're having a conflict with them and maybe you're not seeing eye to eye, you shouldn't be like going and talking about that to someone else, because that's also going to cause you probably even more conflict within your relationship. And I just think like those ideas in general, like empathy, that is the main helper, to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but also like they should be able to do that to you. And if they can't do that to you, then that's, I think, where you have an issue of like, not the person I want to be with.
Some reevaluation.
Okay. So what do you think it looks like to end or try to escape an abusive relationship? It's a hard one. I can start. I have seen personally how abusive relationships, especially over time, get a lot more complicated and make it a lot harder for the victim to leave. And so over time, things like they second guess themselves and they think like the person has the right to treat them that way. Or like they think that they love the other person and they just think the other person doesn't love them, and like that's all they have to be fine with. And I think we see a lot of this in like, I mean, all types of relationships. But I personally have seen this with like my parents. And like they've had a long time of like, it's gone past the unhealthy, because it's like there's purposefully a power dynamic between like my father being on top and my mother not being. And so like getting out of those things, especially after time, is really hard, because the victim just doesn't believe in themselves and like has put everything usually into the person who's victimizing them.
There's a thing, right, like where survivors of abuse, they look, you know, like at their brain chemistry, and it like literally alters it, right? Like you're saying folks, and that's what makes it hard, right? Like especially if this is a relationship where, you know, the person who should leave is like, no, I've invested time. Like I've invested energy, right?
This has
like,
been my whole life.
This has been my whole life. And it's really hard to talk back to those things, especially sometimes where I think it's often not talked about, but people, it's not like we see examples of this every day, right? Like it's abuse for a reason. It's an issue, right? For a reason. It's happening because that, like that, and that's intentional.
Yeah.
You know, like for people to feel like they can't talk about what they're going through, for people to feel like they have to stay in this, you know, in an unhealthy or abusive situation. But with that, in all its like difficulties, like what about those who are like genuinely though, like contemplating, right? Like leaving that abusive or unhealthy relationship. Like what are the steps that you think one can take?
I feel like these questions are hard to answer, because I feel like a lot of it also depends on like the age of these people, because I feel like if it's people my age, like I said, I'm 15, and you're in an abusive relationship, I'm not gonna say like just talk about it or just leave, because I don't know how much power these individuals hold. Because if you're someone who's older, you can like do more. It can get more violent if somebody tries to leave. So I don't really know.
Yeah, it's very unpredictable. Like,
That's a really good point.
and y'all are both bringing up the like impact that power dynamics have, and that's intentional too. Like, especially in dynamics, right, where you're saying someone is older. If in that scenario, right, someone's older, they might have a better job, right? They might have a car, they might have an apartment, they might have more freedom. Those things that, like, say someone who is younger, that's not where they're at, right? Like, even when you all are teenagers, like you're saying, some people's households are not the same.
Yeah.
Right? Like, somebody's parents might be a little bit more strict. They have to know where you're going. It's like, like some people have a little bit more freedom and a little bit more like leeway. I guess something I'm thinking of is like, for someone who is in an abusive relationship, how because it is hard.
No, yeah.
It is hard, right? But like,
While you think of that, I just want to say I think it is hard, and it's hard for multiple reasons, but also because we sitting here know that the reason we have to talk about this is because there's so few cases where a victim makes it out safely. Like, it's very hard in our society for victims to get not only a chance at like a new life, but also like freedom and their health intact. Because every week in Boston, there's another thing of someone who like a mother and their child were killed by her boyfriend who just came and shot them. Like, this is an issue that goes through all parts of our life, and I think it's scary because we know that even if we give advice, it's still very dependent on the situation itself and the people in that relationship. Sorry, but because it is very emotional, and it is a thing that you see this all the time, and a lot of people, I'm sure, like, it's a very common cause of death for women in the U.S. and, well, not, but yeah.
we
It's
don't
very
have
common.
for other places, but like, yeah, like there are so many cases, right? Like, where you do find out that like, like someone has left their abusive partner and then they get killed, right?
Yeah.
Or like they're murdered, or they have to move out of state, right? Like, what happens if the person who has to leave, right, was depending on that person, like the other, for money, for financial stability, for housing stability? Like, that's hard. But I think something that you all had mentioned was like that person, like the person who is the victim of violence has to, like, that first step is them wanting to leave.
Yeah.
And not even wanting to leave, but like understanding like why they can't stay, understanding why they can't stay, understanding the importance of, like leaving that situation. Yeah. And then with it being so difficult, right? Like, this person needs resources, right? Like, they need to find a job. They need to find a way that's going to put food on their table, right? Like clothes on their backs, all of those things. And also like support, because I think that's something we didn't mention, but it's super important, is that in abusive relationships, the abuser isolates their victim, right? And it's intentional why that is. And that's why so many people who are victims of abuse, they realize, like, they feel ashamed. They don't know who to reach out to. They haven't talked to their family in months, in years, in however long. But it's important to find that support too. So even though it is hard, and like I said, it's intentionally made that way, right? Abusers have power. Victims oftentimes are dependent, right? It's important to know that like there is another side to it, right? And it is possible. It's hard, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Do y'all agree with that?
Yeah. I think it's important to watch your family and friends around you, not only so that you can, because it's hard to, as we've talked about, like identify abuse, but I feel like it's very important just to keep an eye on all those around you to make sure not only are they not in an abusive relationship, but are they not behaving abusively towards other people.
I have a question. So we're talking about like how we have to, like you said, checking on people to like just see if they're in one of those situations. But like, what if it is your family abusing you? Like, how can you tell?
It's hard.
Kind of.
What do you mean? How can you like
if it's a parent, because you might just think that's what the parent has to do, like that's their job. But like, I don't really know how to explain it. But I feel like in a romantic way, in a parental way, it's very different. Like the abuse. I don't know how you can like identify that.
One, I can say, just like as a disclaimer, every I believe all teachers and things are mandated reporters. Exactly. And so and that's why it's important that like y'all as young people, when you do confide in adults, they let you know that. Because if there's ever a instance, right, like where you communicate that like you might harm yourself or someone else might be harming you, they have to report that. So that's like one way of folks being like, for you all as young people to maybe be made aware of, right, that like sometimes like your parents might be abusive financially, emotionally, physically, sexually. What's the other one?
Mentally.
Verbally. All those 5 types of abuse can apply to any type of relationship that we're in. So it's definitely not mutually exclusive to romantic or non-romantic partners. Like you're saying, sometimes when you're young, it's like your parent, like saying you can't go out, right? Like they're always like, no, you gotta go to school, you gotta come home. That's it. Go to school, gotta come home. One side of that is there's an immense amount of, like, there's a lot of violence in the city, right? In the world. A lot of parents worry about that. A lot of parents are like, I don't want that to be my kid, right? But then you have the flip side where it's like they literally do want to control everything you do. And they do not want you to be an individual of your own. That's where we're coasting abuse, because that's like being mentally controlling, mentally abusive, emotionally controlling, and emotionally abusive. Because like mentally, if that young person is constantly in their house all day, they're not going out, they're not socializing. They're not finding hobbies. They're not experiencing life, right? Like having adventures. They're literally only around their nuclear family. And it's called a nuclear family for a reason, right? Like it can have the tendency of being explosive when a lot of things go unchecked, like that example. When I say it can be emotionally abusive, if your parent is saying they're doing it for your best interest, but there are other, reasons why they might want to keep you home all the time, they're manipulating you in a sense. And it's hard to say because they're your parents. They gave you life. They brought you here. Yeah. Wouldn't be here without them, quite frankly, right? But that doesn't give them the freedom to just like control you all the time, to impose themselves on you. And is this making sense what I'm saying? And so sometimes it really is like you as a young person having conversations and talking to other people and being like, and maybe it's not an adult, maybe it's your friend. And you're like, does your mom do that too? Does your dad do that too? Like, and they're like, yeah, they're bugging, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they're wilding. Or they're like, no, my parents don't do that, right? Like, let's talk about that. What do you need from me? And I think that that's one of probably and that was a whole spiel. But it's one of like it's a couple of the main words. It's a few of the ways you can figure out, like how to identify what is your parent being abusive, what are the unhealthy characteristics of, that my parents might be displaying versus my parent, like understanding their intentions and understand that they're coming from a good place. And even that's a weird line to float. Yeah. Because sometimes parents are like, no, it's for your best interest. I know better. I lived life. Mm-hmm. We're all living life. There are all things that we might know better. But that doesn't, like give you excuse just because you brought someone into the world to like control every little thing they do. Does that make sense? Because, yeah, like,
I feel
what are you going to say?
No, I agree with everything you just said. I think that it's really about talking to people. And I mean that in like, we have no protection against abusers or people who manipulate us unless we compare our experiences with them to other people. So to be able to compare it to like our friends' situations, or maybe this isn't like your parent being abusive, this is your partner being abusive, so you talk to your parents about it. Comparing those experiences and asking your mom, hey, have you ever been through that in a relationship? Just really kind of gathering your own, like, sounds weird, but statistics, like on how relationships, people act within them, and also looking things up. Like, people will tell you if something is wrong, and sometimes the web is not cautious enough, but at times it is spot on. So like if you were sexually assaulted and you look up something like that, is this assault? It's going to tell you yes, most likely. And so things like that, like just double checking with yourself and knowing how that power dynamic feels. Like, do you feel that you are on the subordinate end and like you're having to be submissive to someone else? Or do you feel like you have a little say, but like these are your parents, so they're annoying? There's a difference. There is a big difference, I think, in how powerless and like voiceless you feel at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How's that landing?
It's making sense.
Good. And it is really hard with parents because like a lot of the way they do teach is through like lessons, which is like, oh, I did this better when I was a kid, or like, oh, I would never do that, so like, why are you doing it? And everyone's their own person, so like, again, that almost to a certain extent, like you have to watch where it constitutes abuse. I think
that was such a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Is there anything else like we can add to the context? Any other questions that's popping up for you?
No, it was just that one.
It was just that one. Ringing true. You guys are doing great, by the way.
Gracias.
You ready for the next one?
And I think we've already kind of covered that last one.
Oh, is abuse intentional? It's always intentional, we're saying.
Exactly.
Yup, all the time.
Talk more. Anything?
You say it, yeah.
Oh. Well, I'm just thinking, because, like, well, you know what you're doing when you're abusing somebody, because at one point it also had to be unhealthy, and I'm just going to assume that you had that conversation, and if they keep doing it, it's like they know how it's making you feel, so that's just got to be.
Yeah.
Right. Like, especially like you're saying, if you brought it up, right? Like, it's sometimes hard for people to bring up, like, when things happen. Some people are non-confrontational. But in, like, the instance where something has occurred and you're like, no, I don't like how that makes me feel.
Yeah.
makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel bad, and the like person continuously does it, that's intentional.
Yeah.
You're doing it on purpose.
And if it's also like a situation just in general where like the abuser is getting everything out of a situation and you're getting nothing, like they're always demanding money from you or they're always demanding sex from you, things like that are pretty telltale about how they not only value you or devalue you, but how they like see themselves as being an appropriate like leader, quote unquote, which is very abusive. But yeah, good job, guys.
All right, Journey. Passing it to you for the second topic.
Okay. The second topic we will be discussing under abusive and unhealthy relationships is the understanding of the similarities and the connections between the two. I think this is an important conversation because like they are very similar, and since they're similar, people might get them confused, but they still like low-key have their differences.
Exactly. Which we've kind of got through the differences. Let's get into the similarities. What's our first question?
Okay. The first question: how are abusive and unhealthy relationships similar?
I think in both unhealthy and abusive relationships, there's something not working, like something isn't making both parties feel safe and comfortable. And I think in an unhealthy and abusive relationship, just in general, like there's a conflict. But I think I think like an unhealthy relationship, you actually work towards that conflict, solving it, and an abusive one, you don't as much. But I think they both have this world of feelings for the people going through it, of like very big emotions, whether that be like shame or sadness or like embarrassment. I think those emotions are similar.
I think the actions are similar. Like, I don't really know how to go in depth, but like they I don't know how to go in depth. Okay, I'm just gonna change the word. Wait, what did I say?
The actions.
Oh yeah, I feel like their actions are similar, but I don't know how to like further explain that, cause like the stuff that happens in both is very common, but I don't know, trying to figure out differences. I think the only difference that's coming to my mind, the only way I could tell the similarities is by like knowing the differences though. So I guess just the fact that abuse keeps on happening. I feel like everything else is pretty much the same.
What's an example? Because I get what you're talking about. What's an example, though, so we can see it?
Hey, maybe you should come back to me.
No, what's the action? Because you said an action.
I know. I'm trying to like put them. Like I'm gonna just say like manipulation. Like you can do that in an unhealthy relationship and an abusive, but you know maybe it's definitely happening a lot more in the abusive relationship. Does that make sense now?
Exactly.
Like,
because it's the frequency, right? Like it's how often it's happening. Sometimes we might slip up. We're human. Things happen. We say things, and it's like, ooh, maybe that was not the most healthiest action ever, right? You talk about it, you're accountable to that action, and then you're intentional about not doing that again.
Yeah.
Right? Cool. Because, right, for manipulation, I'm thinking, like an example is like, dang, I'm really hungry right now. Extremely starving.
Would you like us to do something about that?
Would you like us to do something about that? I would. I would like you to buy me something.
Okay. Just this one time.
Just this one time.
Just this one time.
I could rock with that.
Okay.
Now that made you feel uncomfortable and weird because why? I could have asked you explicitly to buy me some food, but instead I'm beating around the bush. Right? Low key manipulative because I'm trying to sway your emotions. I'm trying to make you feel bad about how hungry I am. Right? Low key manipulative. Not low key, but it is manipulative. We have that conversation. You're like, Janae, I don't mind buying you some food, but you have to ask me, you know, explicitly. And you also have to be mindful that I might not be able to buy you something. You feel me? That's how we talk about it. Now, I know the next time I'm hungry and I'm around Hannah, I don't have any money. Could you buy me a sandwich today?
Yeah, of course.
You feel me? And next week, maybe Hannah's like, I don't have it today. I'm so sorry, Janae. We might have to starve together. And that will just be what it is.
But listening.
I'm listening. I'm being held accountable for my actions. But say we have that conversation, and the next week I do the same thing. Maybe I don't say I'm hungry. Maybe I don't say I'm starving. Maybe I say my stomach is so empty. It is so empty. I am parched.
Jordy, do you want to do something about that?
I ain't doing nothing about that. I'm sorry. That's like, unless you ask me, give me something, you're not getting nothing.
Oh, but for him, maybe, you know, it's not the same thing. But if I keep abusing your niceness and I keep and I intentionally say those things because I know you're going to give me what I want, that's abuse. You get me? That first one, unhealthy. 100%. But that second one is abuse because it's intentional. It's continuously happening. But abuse being power plus control. Like, I am controlling that narrative. I have the emotional power in that sense because I know, like in that sense, Hannah's gonna do what I ask.
I am.
Here, and that's so, and like, and that's oftentimes like the similarities, like you're getting at, same dang action, same action, completely, same action, but the intention is so different. It's so different. It's like, dang.
So there's intention in both, but the intention in an unhealthy relationship is to not act on that behavior again. If can be like. And then the intention for an abusive relationship is like the intention to do it again or keep using that power and keep manipulating that person kind of thing.
Exactly. Because that's the thing. Like sometimes and I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes when something like that in the help, like, you know what, me asking you for food. Maybe that is literally just how I saw people do it. Not intentional nonetheless, right? I kind of knew you would have done it, but like that wasn't like my intent. Might not have been to make you feel a way, to offend you or anything like that, right? But the fact that I didn't think about how what I would do, like what I did would affect you. You know, like that's where you can kind of like say it was kind of intentional in a sense, right? But like I think the real big difference is the pattern and like the frequency of it all. And right, like the intent to literally cause harm, you know, and like to degrade, to belittle, to control.
Sometimes I feel like what you just said is very like spot on because it's not always so black and white that like the person wants to hurt, but it can be just pretty clear that they want to make you feel worse than them. And even like that, it can get confusing for people sometimes, I think. They're like, oh, how is this person abusing me if they're already so down on themselves? Or like, but that is how it gives people emotional power to be able to do that to someone else, especially if they're not in a good place. So it kind of, that's an interesting point.
Exactly. Anything you want to add?
Interesting point.
Nah, I was just really taking that in.
Yeah. Any questions popping up for you?
Nah, just some self-reflection.
Real. That is very
That's all
real.
we can do. You're holding yourself accountable. And I think that like is so great, you know, just to go off that, because it's like sometimes we really just don't know until you talk about it, right? Until someone is like says it and you're like, oh,
Damn.
I've done that before, right? And then like what you do though with that feeling is so important. It's so important.
Yeah. That separates you from people who intentionally hurt others. Highly.
Yeah.
Like it's a big difference.
Next question.
Yes. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing.
Can an unhealthy relationship become an abusive one? Yeah, I've been saying that, you know.
Yeah.
That's all we gotta say.
I feel like all abusive relationships start out unhealthy because most people don't come into a thing with the intention to necessarily abuse someone, and no one comes into a space being like, I'm going to be abused by this person. So I think in general it just starts out as an unhealthy relationship with an uneven power dynamic that over time, like as you said, the person intentionally doesn't listen and just keeps it going, keeps that behavior up. And then over time, there's like a lack of trust and a dependency of the victim on the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm. We talked about the next one. I feel like, what was you thinking?
What was I thinking? Shoot, I had it. like the person who is doing such unhealthy act, like I feel like, you know, sometimes it is like just an accident.
Yeah.
But I feel like maybe they like seeing other people hurt. So that's why they keep on doing it. And then that's how it turns into abuse.
Mm-hmm. And I think that like directly ties to what you were talking about, Hannah. Like, you know, like someone that might not tell themselves, I want to be abusive.
Yeah.
Right? But they might tell themselves, I want everybody else around me to feel less than I do.
Yeah.
To feel smaller than me. Right? And like do everything in their power to ensure that. That's that intention. That's power. That's control. Like all of those buzzwords. And so, yeah, I just feel like you guys said that.
And I sorry, quickly, I just feel like for people listening and like, it is hard to understand like how people out there want other people to be hurt or want other people to feel badly. But we forget in that, like saying that, we forget that society is filled with people just trying to make other people feel very bad about themselves. Like our whole social media is all just like trolls commenting like things on people's posts trying to make them feel bad about their day. So like that is a small example, and those people continue to do that throughout their lives. That's a small example of abuse that can, like, when it's interpersonal and you actually have like physically two people there, that can get very dangerous. You know what I mean? But it is very possible, especially because our society is so cruel to each other.
It's like, what's the saying? Hurt people hurt people.
Yes. Yep.
It's, you know, like it can be annoying how simple it is, but it's really true. Like quite literally, folks, once they experience a certain type of pain, like it traumatizes them.
Yeah.
It alters them. And sometimes they're not able to really recognize like, nah, that's unhealthy. That's abusive. And they end up imposing those same actions on others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cycle.
The next one.
Because you were saying something. Do I skip the next one?
Oh, no. Was you going to say something off of what I was saying?
No. Okay. How can one recognize the shift?
No, not that one.
Okay.
Kind of,
that's what I meant.
Yeah, that I already exactly. And we kind of already we touched on it already. Because, you know, we're talking about the patterns, we're talking about the frequency of things happening, intention, power. All of those things are ways that you can recognize a shift between, you know, like something being unhealthy, something being abusive. I think with us, though, just talking about unhealthy traits, unhealthy characteristics, are there things that as a society we deem it okay for like a guy to do in a relationship over a girl to do in a relationship, or vice versa?
Yup. I'm going to say, because I got an example right now. Because, you know, in society, men supposed to be so dominant, and, you know, it's okay for them to get a little aggressive. But for women, that's not what you should do. You're supposed to be ladylike. You're supposed to be very, what's the word?
Submissive?
Yes, like chill and just take it.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to be taking no disrespect at the end of the day.
And it looks different when a girl is aggressive or dominant or controlling.
Even like I'm thinking of like our favorite YouTubers, like you and I have talked about watching AMP or like Beta Squad, things like that, like which are typically like it's a male cast of people, and like you don't even recognize half the time that like a lot of things said like, oh damn, like there are double standards here. So for instance, like in AMP, everyone is in love with Duke Dennis. No one is gonna say they're not. He is a beautiful man. But within that, there are such double standards between how he views being able to talk to different women and go around versus how he believes a woman should do that. Like they'll have blind dating episodes or things like that, and he'll make a comment on maybe the other women. And I'm not saying it's his fault, it's not. He's not at all close to the worst people out there. It's just when you see these little double standards everywhere, you're like, oh, it makes a lot more sense how so many women are being systemically like abused in our society, because we write it off as like, oh, that's just what the guy does. He's supposed to keep his woman in check, things like that. And we also like okay cheating a lot more for like a man than a woman. Like I know of several marriages that have not failed after the man cheated. But if the woman cheats, it's a different story. Divorce is coming. So it's just things like that that I think are accepting of it, and society allows us women and people to face more oppression because it's not called out as much.
What about, yes, and yes. What about, like, are there things that society says is okay for, like, girls and women to do and not boys and men?
Express their feelings.
Yeah.
Cause like I said, back to them being so dominant, so alpha.
The alpha male, yes.
Like, it's okay. Like at the end of the day, like we're still human, but they think that they have to put on a front and like suppress those emotions.
I think that is such a good point. So my best friend that I've been friends with, he's the only guy I've stayed friends with throughout high school, is a very empathetic man. And I mean that in the form of he's not pretending to be empathetic to get you to listen to him or to communicate with him. He's actually empathetic and a little bit removed from those typical societal thought patterns of men. So because of that, he's been bullied a lot. He's gone through a lot of those things. But yet it hasn't made him into a rude person like it could have. Like he could have taken not getting girls in high school or, not having a lot of friends as like, oh, I need to change this and be a rude person to everyone around me. Instead, he took it as, no, I know that I'm doing something correctly because, first of all, the women in his life have related to him and said, like, this means a great deal to me, how you act, and, like, how empathetic and thoughtful you are. And because of that, like, he hasn't changed himself. And I think there's a lot of young men that, like, would have been on that path, but then they're bullying or, like, getting criticized by others around them instead made them go the opposite way and made them turn into some of these things we're talking about, like more abusive and power-hungry people. So I think that's a really good point, because these, like, differences between power dynamics between women and men in society not only make women more likely to be abused by men, but also make well, and men do get abused, or we know this, but it also makes men more likely to be abused or be an abuser, the way our society works.
I love that example because that's like immediately where I went to, right? Of like your first example, women and girls not like being viewed differently if they are more dominant and like quote unquote aggressive, right? And like men and boys being viewed differently if they are more empathetic, if they are more emotional, quote unquote, show their range of emotions, not emotional, right? So thank you both for sharing your wisdom and thoughts and perspectives. I think the next thing and last thing that I wanted to do was have you guys share out some golden nuggets for our listeners. What are some things that we'd want folks to take away from today's episode?
Leave before it gets out of hand.
Keep both a support group around you and a safe space, like a place you can go to feel space from those people who might be making you consider if you're in an unhealthy or abusive relationship.
I think the one thing I'd want to leave folks with our beautiful equation of abuse being power plus control. A lot of the buzzwords that we've been saying of intentionality, of power dynamics, of, like one of the main differences between unhealthy and abusive being the frequency of it, right? Mm-hmm. And like how often those actions are showing up. Yeah. We good with that?
Yeah.
Anything else? You guys did great. Journey, you can check us out.
Thank you for listening and look out for the next episode of the Real Love, Real Talk podcast. As always, check out our show notes for ways to stay in touch with us. Like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you might be joining us, and visit us at startstrongboston.org for more tools and resources.